Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, author Tate Barkley joins me to talk about his 2023 memoir, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine, and Men. A memoir about growing up, coming out, and finally finding home. That and more in episode 374, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Carol Pope.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Segato.
Hi, I'm Gord Depp with the Spoons. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #1 LGBT podcast on feedspot.com. So today, award-winning Educator receiving the 2019 Valenti Award for Outstanding Teaching by a lecturer from the University of Houston. He's also a successful lawyer with his own firm. He is Tate Barkley, and 2023 sees the release of his memoir, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine, and Men, a memoir about growing up, coming out, and finally finding home. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode, I'm featuring some classic 80s, a spotlight on African-American trans artist Rizzy Tamaine, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 374 through Rainbow Country. And our first stop is what I like to call the Rainbow Country School for Canadian Gay History. On today's lesson from activist, author, and historian Tim McCaskill, the early days of the AIDS epidemic.
At first, we didn't believe it. I was doing the international news for the Body Politic when I read a report in an American paper about a strange new cancer that was apparently affecting gay men. More sensationalized media homophobia, I thought. Didn't turn out that way. Some Body Politic collective members were back and forth to New York and soon reported that something serious was indeed going on. Guys who had seemed quite healthy months before were suddenly dying. Nobody knew what was happening, so everybody got to project their own prejudices on the blank slate of AIDS. If you were an environmentalist, it was obviously big city pollution. If you didn't like poppers, it was caused by poppers. If you didn't like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it was too much sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Maybe it was all that sperm up our bums. If you were a fundamentalist Christian, it was obviously God's punishment, the wages of sin is death, and so on and so on. What we did know was that somehow it was connected to sex. That was bad news for those of us in the business of sexual liberation. We saw a whole community based on sexual networks potentially falling apart. We feared everything we'd built up over a decade was about to be destroyed. Not to mention that we were all going to die. New York and San Francisco were already in a panic. Larry Kramer was screaming that we were fucking ourselves to death. Baths and sex clubs across the U.S. were being closed down. There were no effective medicines. If you had it, it was just a matter of time before you died. The government was doing fuck all, so we had to figure this out for ourselves. In 1983, the community came together to form the AIDS Committee of Toronto and began to organize care teams and support groups. Then HIV was identified. For the first time, we knew this was a blood-borne virus that could be sexually transmitted. ACT took on prevention campaigns. What squared the circle of sexual liberation versus a deadly sexually transmitted disease was safe sex. Condoms came to our rescue. We could still have sex, just had to use a rubber. AIDS in Toronto was born in the shadow of the bath raids, remember? We had just moved heaven and earth to defend these places. We weren't about to let them close down now. So while baths and clubs were being shuttered south of the border, ACT demanded there be no such closures in Toronto. Baths here remained open and became sites of outreach and education, and they're still open today. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, Sunday dinners, moonshine, and men.
I wish culture shock was my only problem at Thompson. Before coming here, I had developed an attraction to Latinos. They were a minority at Thompson Intermediate School, but one guy caught my eye. Jorge Lascano was on the 8th grade football team. We would often practice late and had to shower together. His locker was close to mine, and I could practically feel him before seeing him walk into the room. I tried to avoid eye contact with Jorge, who was close friends with a macho, slender white guy on the team named Justin Mincer. Justin Mincer oozed what people today call toxic masculinity. Even at an early age, I saw him as a potential bully and didn't want to draw his attention. I got through most of the season without any incidents, but with only a few games left, the coach asked Jorge, myself, and several others on the team to stay late to work on some things. By the time we made it to the showers, most of the rest of the team was gone, and it was only Jorge and me with a few stragglers. I tried everything to resist, but the old feelings of desire were overwhelming me. Jorge was walking around in a jockstrap, laughing and razzing the other guys as he usually did. I could not resist looking at him. He and I undressed about the same time on this day. I had stupidly made a point to pace myself to track Jorge. We wound up showering next to each other. I thought I was being covert and clever. I was looking for a quick glimpse of him, nothing more. I must have hesitated a few seconds too long while looking at his penis. I only wish I had turned away to make it seem accidental. Jorge looked over and caught my glance. I watched his eyes widen as he realized what was happening. I tried to look up at his face, but as if I had lost all control, I wound up looking down at his penis again. "Barkley," he said, catching my attention. I immediately felt flushed and tried to look away, but it was too late. I only became more aroused and started to develop an erection. My body had completely betrayed me, and there was nowhere to hide. Then Jorge asked, "Barkley, are you a fag?" He started laughing. "Barkley, up here," he said, directing me to look at his eyes. "Are you looking at my dick? Are you a fag? Are you a fucking fag?" He had caught me, and even though I denied it, I still couldn't stop looking at him. I think I was having an out-of-body experience or a non-alcoholic related blackout. Everything was in slow motion. It was surreal. "So, Barkley, you like my dick," he said, louder for anyone within earshot to hear. This had turned from curiosity to harassment. "So you want some of it?" he said, waving it at me. "Are you a fag that wants some of it? Is that it?"
Tate Barkley, hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. Mark.
I have to say, thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about your memoir, your story, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine and Men. That's the title. Sunday Dinners, Moonshine and Men. I need to start there. This title, what is the story behind this particular title? Because there has to be one.
Well,
it's a great title.
Thank you. Well, there is. And, I started writing the book way back in 2013, and I would pick it up and put it down. And what prompted me to start writing about it was I was really wrestling with issues with my dad who died in 2012. Well, anyway, so as I started to write and organize the book, I thought about the Sunday dinners part came from, after all this reflecting, and all the chaos that I had when I was a kid, the place where I felt safe. So Sunday dinners is that safe space for me. My grandmother Kirkman, she would always take us to church on Sunday, but after church was not necessarily a safe space, but after church, we always had this big dinner at my grandma Kirkman's house, and she just loved me. And being around her was a space of just unconditional love. And she would always allow me to be a part of getting that Sunday dinner ready. And she always insisted that Sunday be a time of love. So the Sunday dinners comes from, I wanted in the title something good about, my youth, and Sunday dinners was it. Now, the Moonshine portion of that is a little different. The book is really about, my relationship with my dad over the many, many decades and the struggle I had in that relationship. But my dad and I were both active alcoholics for a long time. My dad died active alcoholic. And the Moonshine part is that it sort of is a symbolic of the generations of alcoholism in our family. And my dad used to run moonshines back in North Carolina in the late 50s. So I actually start the book with a story he used to love to tell, and he told it with great bravado, I assure you, about how he was being chased by the law while he was running moonshine in North Carolina. And interestingly enough, he always said, we get moonshine and liquor, it comes natural to our family, because I had a great-grandmother, my great-grandmother Barkley, who was an actual moonshiner during Prohibition. She had 3 stills out on a creek that ran through Barkley land in North Carolina. And she was known as a very fierce woman, and very proud, very fierce, and very proud of her white lightning. So it sort of is symbolic of our family history of alcoholism, and particularly, my dad and I had a relationship centered around alcohol. Whereas the men part, well, I really struggled, Mark, for many, many years with being a gay man. It was just not the culture that I was brought up in, to where such being gay was acceptable in any way. Homosexuality, I heard it everywhere when I was growing up, was an abomination. And so I struggled with being gay, and once I did manage to step out, into exploring my sexuality, I struggled with being okay with being with people that I was actually attracted to and wanted to be with. And, the men symbolizes that process, and my dad, and sort of the trouble that I had and the chaos that ensued in my early days of trying to come out while an active alcoholic. So that's where the title comes from. There is a happy ending though. So that gets back to Sunday dinners, but yeah. So that's where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. So Tate, in your memoir, you talk about poverty, you talk about sexuality, you talk about addiction. Just now you were talking about Sunday dinners as well as Moonshine. You were talking about your dad's struggle with alcoholism. Can you talk to me a bit more about how your dad's alcoholism, how it affected you? And do you think that because that's what you saw, that led you down your own path of essentially drinking because you saw it through your dad first?
I think for me, I think there's definitely some truth to that in that my dad, I never recall a time in where my dad was not drinking.
Mm.
And it was a part of our life. And that was really, drinking was my dad's hobby. That's just what he did. And it was evident to me even when I was young, and certainly once I became a teenager, that, dad coped with drinking. And when he drank, he became bolder and bolder. And it was always what he sought when he was troubled, and always what he sought when he was happy. I don't even remember a day, Mark, where my dad didn't drink when I was growing up. And as time went on, it was the acceptable form of entertainment amongst my dad and his friends. And, we grew up, I spent my first 12 years in the Deep South. And that's just what men did. They drank. And then, on Sunday pretended they didn't. And then later, once we moved to Texas, my dad got a job in the refineries, here in the Gulf Coast area, particularly here in the Houston area. I mean, working folks, they worked in the refineries because that's the big industry here. And that refinery culture, talk about it in the book, grew up in that refinery culture. And boy, ice houses, which is where you drank beer here, and pool halls and dance halls and drinking in the driveway. That was the world I grew up in. And I started drinking, in seventh grade. And I didn't stop until I had lost everything at 33. So, yeah. And my dad really struggled with me, toward the end of my drinking days as I became an adult. My dad was my favorite drinking buddy. I hated him for a lot of reasons. But once he was okay with me drinking around him and I became a drinker, he became my buddy. And then that made the whole relationship, a lot more palatable to me. And for both of us, really. So I think dad's drinking had a lot to do with it. Now, was it the only factor? Yeah, I don't know. All I know is drinking helped me cope.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I took a drink, I felt so much better about the world I was in. Mm-hmm. So I think that had a lot to do with it also.
There's I guess a saying, you're either a happy drunk or an angry drunk or a mad drunk or something. Mm-hmm. How would you categorize your dad, and how would you categorize your former self?
Well, I was a happy drunk. I was always a happy drunk. And my dad was more of the angry drunk type. He could be joyous while he was drinking, but once he passed a certain point, he became really bitter. He would, and angry. Mm-hmm. And my dad in those moments could be violent, and mostly his violence was directed at my mom when it came out. It didn't always come out. I don't want to mischaracterize it. But there were instances when it did. And though I experienced it a couple of times, his violence while drunk, my mom really took the brunt of it. So yeah, I would, like I said, there were times he could be a happy drunk, but most of the time he would reach that place in his drinking to where he'd be hard to read and very scary.
So you are a successful lawyer and educator. By writing this book, by telling your story, your personal story, were you apprehensive at all? Were you nervous at all that it may have an effect on your career of sorts? Did those thoughts come into your mind at all before you started actually writing this?
Yeah, I got sober. I've been sober and clean now for 24 years. And as part of that process, I did a lot of talking and I did a lot of writing, but it's all in a very, I got sober after I got out of rehab. I became a very dedicated member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I did my step work and still attend my meetings and even all this time later. But as part of that AA 12-step tradition, I did a lot of writing and talking and sharing. So initially, when I shared about these things, I felt very, very safe because it is a safe space. But when I started about sharing these things to a broader world where I didn't have the safety of the recovery community, I did think about that, Mark, because I thought to myself, what will my clients think? I have a law firm. I have a law firm and people that I'm responsible for here to pay and things to do. So I really hesitated early on. But I had to believe in the process. We say it in recovery, and I always say it to others, to whoever will listen, that if we're honest with ourselves and we're honest with each other, and we dedicate ourselves to trying to do the next right thing and to being of service to others, it's all gonna work out. I've been saying that since I've been in recovery, but with this book, the rubber really met the road on that, Mark. Like, do I really believe that? Because, perhaps the whole world's about to know all the shit you got into. I don't know any other way to put it. And it's not, it's not a nice look, but by the time I worked through all that, I said, you know what, I believe in this. And if I can share a personal anecdote as to why I believe in it, I'd like to. When in the early days of my sobriety, I was really working just kind of document review jobs, and I never wanted to go back into litigation because in my own head, one of the reasons I drank so much was because I had my own little law firm and I was a litigation attorney, a trial lawyer, and it can be very stressful. So once I got sober and kind of steadied myself a little bit in sobriety, I just kind of vowed that I'm not going to go back into that kind of stressful work. But eventually I got, a call from someone I knew in the business, and they said, there's this guy, and it was my law partner, and he really needs some help. He's got a lot of work and you're perfect for it. And my first question was, is it a litigation firm? Has it got trial work and all those deadlines? Because what was most important to me was protecting my sobriety. And they said, yeah, that's what it is. Well, the long and the short of it is I went to work with him, the man that would become a law partner and dear friend, mentor in so many ways. And early on, we went to this business coach, and he insisted we go to a business coach so we could. And I told this business coach everything, my recovery, all that I did. She and I became great friends. And then in November of 2001, I got asked to share my story. In AA, we have a tradition of open meetings where anyone can come and an alcoholic will share their story of experience, strength, and hope. Well, I got asked to do that. And Janine, who was our business coach, says, you need to invite Steve, your law partner. You need to invite him to this. And I told her, are you kidding me? I have to, be honest in my story. If he knows all these things about me, he's done with me. I can't do that. And she just said, I think the best thing for any future relationship is for you to invite him. Just be honest about everything. and then see what happens. So with great reluctance, I invited Steve, who was not in recovery. And, Steve came from, up, New York, up north, raised in Queens. And I just, thought this guy's going to drop me like a hot potato. But I vowed that I was going to tell my story as it needed to be told. And I did that night. He showed up and I did that night. And I kind of knew that would end it for us. But I was wrong. I remember he told me, he said, I'm almost getting teary-eyed. Sorry about that, Mark. But he told me, he said, anybody that is willing to be that honest, I can trust. And here we are 23 years later, and we built a very successful law firm together. And I did not know how to be a man in the early days. I kind of drank learning how to be a man away, how to be an adult, I should say, really. And he helped me on that road. So that experience, to circle back to a prior question, also helped me say, then I'm going to tell that same truth in this book to everybody, because, it is about trust. And I know that there are people who have endured what I have endured, and they need to know that it's all going to be okay.
Rainbow Country will be back right after this.
Hi, I'm Eric Radford, Olympic and world champion figure skater, pianist, and composer, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Terra.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
When did gay pride become just pride?
I can answer that for you, and I can answer what the big turnaround was, and it's a very simple thing. Corporatism is when gay pride became pride. As soon as we got corporate sponsors, as soon as we had the approval of the corporations around us, oh my God, the beer company's going to sponsor it and they're going to give us a float, and look at the telephone company's going to do something and someone else is going to do something.
But drop the gay.
Yeah, drop the gay and include everyone. And I always thought, why should we include everyone? This is a gay pride celebration. It is for people who are in a sexual minority. We had something that was for us to make people recognize who we are and to acknowledge that we actually existed.
Award-winning playwright and author Brad Fraser reflects on some important gay history. The time frame, the 1990s. When gay pride becomes pride, with the introduction of corporate sponsorships.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Terra on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Terra providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Keegan Hurst, former professional rugby player, coach, raving homosexual, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So we've talked about Sunday dinners, moonshine. Let's get to the meat of the matter.
Men. Oh my God, men. Oh.
So you grew, men, you can't live with them, you can't live without them.
That is, I know, it's true.
you grew up in North Carolina. Whereabouts?
Yeah, I grew up in outside of a little town called Statesville in Iredell County, North Carolina.
Mm-hmm. And so for yourself growing up in the Deep South, like you were there up until 12.
Yeah.
In those early years, were you recognizing that you had these same-sex attractions? When did those thoughts and ideas start coming into your head that, hey, I'm attracted to other boys, other classmates, teachers, or what have you? Mm-hmm. I have these same-sex attractions. When did that start coming into your head?
You know, I think I can say with certainty that started coming into my head, probably in 6th grade. Mm. And I talk about it a lot, in the book that I had a best friend and his name was Jerry. And I had a best friend, and we were still living in North Carolina at the time. I was 12. And those feelings, those attractions were coming up for me. And of course you're very curious about sex at that age, or at least I was. And Gene, and I think about that time, but, Jerry and I, we always kind of talked about how we wanted to get a girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And then I actually got a girlfriend, and he was more excited about it than Jerry was more excited about me having a girlfriend than I was. And, because it's all he wanted to talk about. And then the summer of 77, we started exploring, each other, physically. Mm. I trusted him completely. He was just the best friend you could have, and we connected so well. So my first actual sexual experience, really an experience of physical intimacy, was at the age of 12. Mm. And I knew then that I was attracted to other guys. Mm-hmm. And we invented a game to justify, our being intimate with each other, or we introduced a game. We called it odd and even. So whoever, lost the coin toss, had to perform some specific act. And we were really, that summer of 77, we explored one another a lot, and it was very sweet. And I look back on it, it is, and he was such I felt so safe, and I remember one day, Mark, though, when this sort of all started, ending, where Gene, just due north of the Genevieve trailer park where we were at, due north of that was Jerry and his family's house, and they lived in a mobile home up a dirt road up on a hill. So one day, Jerry and I are walking up that dirt road, and it was later in the summer, and we had been sort of messing around with each other for a couple of months. And Jerry said to me, he put his arm around me, and he said to me, is what we're doing homosexual? And I kind of froze because I knew the gravity of the question. Mm. I so enjoyed being with him, not only as a friend, but in a more intimate way, physical way. And I knew if I told Jerry, yes, this is homosexual, I knew that it would be over, because we both were raised in an area. There were no openly gay people that anywhere in our lives there. And we both heard in church that homosexuality was an abomination. And there's an impact to that, because whether it came from the pulpit or came from our own kin people, we both knew, Jerry and I both knew, that it is an abomination, and that it was okay in the eyes of those around us. It was okay to shame somebody for being a homosexual. They didn't say gay; they said homosexual. And you should shame yourself. Shame on you. You should be ashamed. I mean, that was the commentary of anything associated with being gay. So I remember after this pause, I told Jerry, no, it's not. Homosexuals, they do these things. We're only doing these types of things. And he seemed, relieved. And it wasn't long after that my dad made the proclamation, as he was prone to do: we're leaving. We're going to Houston. Houston's booming. It's Boomtown, USA, and we're going. And that's kind of what ended it.
Was it difficult for you growing up in the Deep South and knowing that you were gay? Was that difficult for you?
Well, yes, absolutely yes. And I remember, there were no gay folks around. And I remember watching, it was the CBS Evening News. We lived in a trailer park, Jerry lived in a trailer park across the Bell Farm Road. And then we were in a trailer, and then we lived in an actual trailer park south of there. And my dad and I were watching the news, and it was in June of 77 before we moved to Houston. And there was this segment about the gay pride parade, or the gay freedom parade in San Francisco, just this little glib on the evening news. And I was watching TV on the floor, and Dad was in his chair. And as we saw them, and people, it was very festive, and people were dressed up, and men were dressed up in drag, and men were dressed up as fairy godmothers, and it was very festive. And I remember my dad kicking me and saying, "Bubba, I better never." And I knew what he meant. He didn't have to say anything else. So he it just sort of reinforced what I knew already. You can't be gay. That's not right. So it was difficult. And I have a couple of situations that I talk about in the book, even once we came to Houston. But, Texas is still a very conservative place, and it was a conservative place there. And it didn't get much better, here. And in those days. So I'll say it was difficult because there was no one really around. There was no one to talk to, no person to talk to. The narrative was driven by TV, not by people, if you were a young gay person here.
So you ended up going into the closet. At what point did you decide to come out? Was that later on in life for you?
Yeah. For me, I had my experience with Jerry in the summer of 77. And then I had, in high school, I met a guy, and this was really my first love. And I met him at a debate tournament. I was a high school debater, and for the summer of like 81, it was we shared a very special relationship and bond. It was physical, and it was we explored things, certainly much more with more depth and intimacy than I did with Jerry. And this was my first love. His name was Rob, and this was my first love, without doubt. But I remember when we ended it at the end of that summer, I remember him saying, he says, "I don't think we should do this anymore. I'm just feeling too guilty." And then there was this pause, and I felt my heart drop. But I said the same thing. I said, I know. And I remember saying this, Mark, and I look back on it and go, boy, how our lens was skewed in those days. And I remember saying, you're right. We don't need to be doing this. It's not good for our country. That's what I said. And that's how I believe that was the dogma of the time. And you got to remember, it's 1981. It's Ronald Reagan's America in 1981. And I remember just going to a campaign event for Ronald Reagan, that year, during the time of the Texas primary, which was April or May of 80. And I went to this event, and I remember this lady, this classic, Texas woman of the 80s, kind of frosty, big hair. She raised her hand, and she was immaculate looking, beautiful makeup. And she grabbed the mic and she said, Governor, she was asking Ronald Reagan a question at the time. And she said, Governor, what do you think about the idea of these homosexuals teaching in our schools? And I'll never forget Reagan's response. Me and a buddy that I later learned was also gay, we're standing there. He had driven me down there to this event because I thought I was all about Ronald Reagan. He's going to save America, And I remember him saying, I will never condone or grant homosexuals special rights. That lifestyle is an abomination, and it is harmful to our country. And I'll never forget him saying that at that meeting. And I remember feeling it like, I knew that already, but here was this person that I thought, oh, wow, Ronald Reagan, saying the same thing. And I remember on the drive back, my friend who had driven us, I wasn't old enough to drive yet, didn't have a license. I remember him saying, I wouldn't vote for him. I'm not going to vote for him. And I was so brainwashed at the time. I said, I would. I mean, I would vote for him if I could, cause he's, he'll save us. That was a long time ago, Mark. Just so y'all know, the views have drastically changed since then.
It's a long time ago, but the words that you said in regards to what this woman was asking, what do you think about these homosexuals teaching in our schools? Those are still being said today in America.
Yep. They sure are.
And it may be 2023 or 1981. It's still there. When did you decide to come out, and how did your family react when you came out?
Well, I decided I finally came out I was 28. I was late to come out. And at least what my view, I was late to come out. And I had already started my own law practice and already had a house and was building, life. I was having considerable success as a personal injury attorney up in North Texas. I'd moved to North Texas from Houston and in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Arlington area. And there were gay people around. It's the 90s. And so there were gay people around. And I came out to one guy after a trip to Cancun. And I went with some friends of mine to Cancun, and there were just, to be very, upfront about it. There were so many beautiful men down there on that trip. You know what I mean? And I just couldn't stand it anymore. I didn't do anything. And I came home, I remember I just felt so tired, Mark. I was so tired, and I was so exhausted, and I was so discontented and restless. And right when I got back, I called my first love, Rob, who was in Houston. And I said, if I came down to Houston, we had kind of sort of kept in touch, but not really, those friends. Mm-hmm. So I said, can I come, if I come to Houston this weekend, would you have dinner with me? It's really important to me. And he said, yeah. I'll never forget it, Mark. We went to dinner at this Mexican place, and I couldn't make it through dinner. And he said, so really, how are you doing? And I just said, I'm just struggling. And I wanted to cry right there. And he says, so you're still struggling then, aren't you? And I said, yes. It was almost coded language because we were in public, So, but you had to talk in codes, for a lot of years. And so he pays the bill. We go out to his car, and then I just bust out crying. And he puts his arm around me, and he says, so you're not out? And I said, no. And then he tells me basically his story, how when he, toward the end of college, he came out to his best friend, and she went with his first gay club because he was scared to death to go by himself. And then slowly but surely, and by this time, he was a very successful attorney also, and he was out. And I was kind of like, and he told me, he says, I was just as afraid. But he says, Dallas, Fort Worth area has lots of gays. So don't worry about it. You're not alone. And he says, I know, and I'm your friend. So you've already started telling friends, it's going to be okay. You just do it at your own pace. And I remember driving back from that dinner with Rob that night, feeling a sense of courage, because he did do it. And he and I both felt similarly back in that, summer of 81, that this is wrong, it's shameful, but yet he was doing well. Because I was afraid of same thing. If my clients know, my clients will leave me. And if my friends know, maybe they won't be my friends. So it was that year, this was, I was 28. And so I slowly started coming out to my friends. And I talk about this in the book. I came out to my friends and it was fine. I came out, and my sisters, I have 3 younger sisters, and all 3 of them told me the same thing. They said, we knew you were gay because you used to have your friend Rob come over, because my friend Rob would come over when parents weren't there. And, the very Rob I'm talking about. And they said, we knew then that he was your boyfriend. So, whatever ruse I thought I was playing on the world, it just wasn't working very well, at least not with the women in my life. So they immediately knew, no, yeah, we knew you were gay even then. And they were young and knew it. So I didn't have a hard time. I told my mom, and she said, we thought about that when you were in high school. And she started crying, and she just said, Bub, I got to deal with this in my own way. And I said, okay, Mom, take your time and do whatever you need to do. And she said, I just want you to be happy. And you're not going to be able to marry or have kids. And I said, Mom, at the time there was no marriage right, and I said, Mom, what makes you happy is not what makes me happy, and it's going to be okay. And she eventually was okay with it, but I could not bring myself to tell my dad, though. My dad was the epitome of the hyper masculine Southern man, and I don't mean to portray him as like all bad. He wasn't. He could be tenderhearted when he wanted to be. But this was just, I knew this was not the expectation that he wanted of his son. And I don't tell my dad till much later. In fact, I go through that in the book, this struggle about when do I tell my dad, who for better or for worse was the single most dominant, influential figure in my life. So I did, and it was a good coming out process, and I didn't lose a single client because they found out I was gay. I didn't lose a single friend, or if I did, they weren't a good enough friend for me to notice. So it was true. I received a lot of love and support some folks, particularly some of my straight guy friends, the first thing they always ask, were you attracted to me? Which is always a loaded question, because if you say no, which most of the time it was no, then their feelings get hurt. Like, you're not attracted to me? And if you said yes, they got uncomfortable. Like, are you still attracted to me? So, just like, you gotta just be done with it, and you have to say, yeah, no, you're very good looking. You're just not my type. You have to, then you got to start working, yes, you're a hot guy. It's just not my type.
I have a random question for you.
Sure.
Who are Anson and Emerson?
Oh, well, Emerson is mine and Anson's beautiful little King Charles Cavalier, and he's our baby, and and he requires, Emerson is a diva. And he requires two parents, both Anson and I. And Anson is my husband and the love of my life.
And how long have you guys been together?
We met Christmas time of 2011. And at the time he was in fellowship. He's a doctor, a pediatrician. He was in fellowship up in Philadelphia. So we met, saw each other 2 or 3 times while he was home visiting his parents that Christmas. And I had reached that point in my life, Mark, where I said, I'm just not the kind of guy that's going to have a long-term relationship. I had yet to have a relationship last more than 3 or 4 months, and I could hyperanalyze all that, but, I just didn't. But I don't know Anson was just different. And I literally, anyway, we saw each other 3 times when he was here with that Christmas. And we started texting and chatting on the phone. And he invited me up to Philadelphia. And I was so busy, I said, I just can't find a time, And then I just said, screw it. The second weekend, I guess, in January of 2012, I said, can I come up this weekend? I don't care that I have trial on Monday. I don't care. So I went to Philadelphia to see him. And I remember us driving to breakfast that Saturday. And I just looked at him and said, it's about time we went to breakfast together, because I should go out with the man who's going to be my husband. And he looked at me in that way that you can be looked at, like, who the F are you? Really? And obviously he wasn't there yet. And, but I knew, and we proceeded in 18 months of the long distance thing. And by the grace of God, or whatever higher power you ascribe to, he found a job in Houston, and which was, where I was based, of course. And he and I got married in 2017, not long after it became legal, and then we remain married, and it's it's just a whole new world to be in love, and to be in love with somebody that you adore, and
in Texas, of all places.
In Texas, I know, and
you show them.
I am. And I'll tell you what, thank God for that Supreme Court decision, which is one of the reasons I worry about. I feel like we're starting to walk backwards here in the States anyway. So it's really time for I don't want to start lecturing. We've really got to rally as a queer community and as a country to sort of, there's starting to be a very, very reactionary force pushing back. And, but anyway, but the bright note was that we got married, and it's just, I love being married. I never thought I'd have anybody in my life. I had reached that point, but I actually love being married, and never thought that would happen, but I do.
So Tate Barkley, I have one last question for you, and it's simply this. Your memoir, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine, and Men. What do you hope audiences come away with after they've read your memoir? What do you hope people take away from essentially your story?
What I hope people take away from this is really two things. And that is, the first one is honesty. And that starts with being honest with yourself. I struggled with being honest about being a gay man with myself. I was just hell bent in trying to make myself straight. And all I managed with that was self-hatred, self-shame, and alcoholism. Because the alcohol helped me repress myself to make me feel better for a little while. But when I started coming out and I started to be honest with the people in my life, I immediately felt better about myself. And we all have our own situation, but being honest with ourselves and honest with others in our lives and reaching the point of acceptance of yourself it truly changed my life. And I love my life right now. And I love the people in it. And they are wonderful, open, and accepting people. So that's what I hope. If you're struggling with this issue of coming out, or even struggling with alcoholism, there is help, and it is okay. There's no reason to be ashamed of either one of them. There's help, and there's people that will help you and people who will love you. So rigorous honesty and being there and helping others as they go through, their own struggles, I think, are the two things that I'd like folks to take away from this book.
Tate Barkley, well said, well done, well written. Thank you for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. It's been a joy to be here. I just
You're
so
a great
much
interview.
Oh, thanks. Great.
Well done.
Good.
Well done.
Thank you. Bile rose in my mouth and I wanted to retch. Jorge, shut the fuck up, I shouted. I was not looking at your dick. Jorge looked at me up and down, hesitated and grinned. What I thought was beautiful about him changed into something weasel-like. I wanted to run away, but now the entire locker room was listening and moving closer to us. I thought you might be a fag, he said. Then he said it, the words I'd been hearing all my life. Boy, you're as queer as a $3 bill. Jorge left the shower. I did not follow. I lingered in hopes it would all just go away. Jorge must have gotten bored with me that day or had somewhere to go because he stopped the harassment. But from then on, any time after practice, if I dressed near him or we showered at the same time, he would say, "Are you looking, Barkley? Are you looking?" One day he was walking around in a jock strap, calling me a fag and asking if I liked his tighty-whities as we got dressed. When his friend and fellow asshole Mincer walked in, Jorge decided to involve him in the fun as we walked out the door. Hey, Mincer, guess what? Barkley's a fag. I caught him looking at my dick while we were in the showers. Barkley wants it. Mincer walked over, thumped my ear. Are you a fag, Barkley? Oh, my God. We have one in the locker room. Mincer was a mean-spirited bully who loved to harass and insult everyone. Now I was in his sights as the worst possible thing, a fag.
Tate Barkley's memoir, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine, and Men is available wherever you get your favorite books and on Amazon.ca. It has a 5-star rating. For even more, simply visit TateBarkley.com.
Phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush, and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com where everything is connected and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, follow me on socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara